Hello, and welcome to another webinar in MarketMuse's Content Strategy webinar series. I'm Jeff Coyle, the co-founder and chief strategy officer for MarketMuse. And today's discussion is something that I seem to be talking about every day now. But I've got two amazing guests who have implemented this at their agency and are doing really, really cool stuff, as we just discussed when we were prepping. But before we get into all of this detail, we're going to be talking about how to use humans to improve authority for AI content. So we're keeping humans in the loop, but we're also inspiring human creativity. We're also talking about ways that we can make humans most efficient while still taking advantage of kind of the leading edge of technology. A little bit of housekeeping, though. Ask us anything you want, detailed, as much detail as you want. If it's relevant to our discussion, I will weave it into our discussion. If it's not, we'll save some time at the end, whether it's long form or rapid fire, depending on how long our discussion goes. If you do ask us something really weird, we might have to send it to you via email. You may get this recording in the next day or 2 days. Please download it, share it with your friends and colleagues. And while you're at it, go check out our webinar library. We've got hundreds of recordings from some amazing people like Andy Crestodina, Pam Didner, who else? Jennifer Rotner on developmental editing, which I love that one. If you want to go back and talk about developmental editing, which I'm sure we'll talk about today as we keep humans in the loop. But go check those out. If you have any feedback about those, shoot me an email at jeff@marketmuse.com or DM me on the old X at Jeffrey_Coyle. And I will talk to you about, some things that we might have in the works. Cool. So before next steps go, let's intro the guests. We have two today, which is a little bit different than normal. So I'm going to introduce them both and have them talk about all the things that they work on at Verblio. Ryan Sargent is the director of content marketing at Verblio, and Megan Skalbeck is the head of AI, although her title says AI stuff. And I've also seen a slide deck where it says she's doing a bunch of cool blank with AI. But Ryan, tell me a little bit about how you got to Verblio and kind of the current mission and how that's changed since you've been there.
Yeah, I come from a creative background. I was originally a struggling musician and learned that applying creative storytelling skills and exciting people who in the audience that's marketing. And you even get to hold out a tip jar at the end and get an email sign up. So the parallels worked really, really nicely and in my favor, and that over the course of a career in content marketing has led me to Verblio. Verblio's, we like to say, the world's friendliest content creation platform, and we work with people who need content of all sizes, shapes, flavors. Lately, really focused on large-scale content projects. So talking hundreds or thousands of pieces of content, agencies that have huge needs for local SMBs, for example, or businesses that have a need for hundreds or thousands of location pages and web copy of that nature. So we do content, and that's a perfect place for me because I love content, whether it's an avant-garde jazz album or a humble B2B ebook. So that's me.
Avant-garde jazz, how it relates to Verblio, how it relates to AI. That's a question coming later. Yes, your band poster behind you is for Honeycomb and where you play the trombone. That's in my notes. So
yes.
Gotta love that. In the Denver
marketer
area,
by day, rockstar by night, I think is the idea, at least.
So if you're going to Aspen, please look up the Song Kick profile and see if you can see Honeycomb playing and crash that wedding, right? Megan, you are you're in Colorado as well, head of AI. How have you evolved into being the head of AI at Verblio, and how has AI specifically changed your team, organization, processes, workflows?
Yeah, absolutely. I've been following AI pretty closely since the first GPT back in 2018. Which feels ancient ago. And I remember first seeing that. It was, the olden days, and being just blown away by the fact that it was writing words, which to look back at now, the quality of that was so inferior to where we are today, which has been cool to see. But so I've been following that for a while. I have also, though, been a freelance writer and content marketer. That was actually my first role at Verblio. I was initially a freelance writer, helping to create content for our clients. We work with thousands of US-based freelance writers to create content. So I was doing that. Then I joined the team as a content marketer. And then about a year ago is when I switched to actually really focusing on AI. Just given my background with that, I've done programming in the past, kind of have that both creative and tech sides in my background. And so I started doing that, figuring out, okay, AI is coming. This was before ChatGPT had come out. So it wasn't quite the ubiquitous topic everywhere that it is now, that we were figuring out, okay, how should we be using this to help produce more content at scale for our clients who need content at that level while still using our freelance writers to make it good. And so it's been a constant evolution in the last year. We've iterated on our process so many times, especially as new models have come out, and figuring out the best ways to use those. And again, just constantly kind of tweaking that balance of AI and writer and how they can best combine. So it's been a lot of fun.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about today, is that balance. And I know I've had the experience, we released a large language model technology called First Draft many years ago. So it was actually over 3 years ago, I believe, the first versions. And so I've had the opportunity of working with these things for 5, 6, 7 years at some layer, and even some of the generation technologies that preceded, even the words, that people have been using in the, mid tens. I don't even know if that's what you call it. The mid tens. I don't even know if that's a real word. And was inspired by a number of those things to build a lot of the things that we're working on at MarketMuse. So this is a perfect conversation for that. I'd tee it up, though. I'd say were mistakes that I'm seeing, and I would love your take on it. I think a lot of teams are jumping over the entire content process. So they think that they're going to go from a very inferior prompt into a, publicly available language model and get to a very, very usable draft that's going to be, in a great spot, or that then they can edit and do that effectively. Are you seeing that as kind of the trend for people who think that that's what using AI for content is? It's kind of like a button draft, fix the draft, go. Is that how you think people are? And do you see that as a major problem?
Yeah. Ryan, you have a good line on this. I like, just with regard to the content strategy piece and talking about just because the AI can talk about anything does not mean you are in fact qualified to write and talk about anything.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I don't know if you want me on that soapbox this early in the webinar is the problem.
Well, I do. Get on there.
Megan, why don't you lead off by talking about why you can't drink AI straight from the tap?
Yeah.
I think because that's part of what you were alluding to, Jeff, and that's we very much agree. You can't just take something straight from the language model and publish it on your website.
Yeah. To that point, Jeff, I think it has been a evolution again, especially since ChatGPT came out and everyone started using this technology of identifying. People have learned, I think, that they need to be reviewing anything that AI generates before they publish it. But I think it's a further step to learn exactly what they need to be looking for, and how they should be looking to improve that content, what they need to be checking, what its most likely errors are going to be, where it's most likely to hallucinate. Because obviously anything that it writes sounds equally confident. And that's the risk, is it's really easy to just start trusting it full sail. So when we're working with our writers, we've had to do a lot of training and education around that, of what specifically to look out for, what they should be doing when they're reviewing AI content. But also beyond that, we've been moving away from the just have the AI, create a full draft that then goes to a human and keep it the separate pieces, to really putting the tools in the writer's hands so that they're going back and forth with the AI earlier, instead of getting that full draft. So humans able to, review the outline, they're able to review the intro, and they're editing it as they go, which then improves what the AI will produce later. So that's been kind of one of my personal soapboxes. It needs to be the more back and forth you can do, the more you can actually leverage AI's ability to improve and to learn from what the writer has changed. But that combination of using the writer in the process as early as possible, and then making sure that the writers understand, here's what you need to watch out for. If the AI says a number, you need to fact check that because it's probably not right. Things like that. Or if it says according to the CDC, the CDC probably didn't say that. So there's just been a lot of education around that, because and we can talk about the exact editing process. Like, I think I've heard a lot of people say, it's a totally different skill set working with AI content, which is true to a point, but I think it also still relies on the same like basic principles of good writing. And so we've been really we're lucky to already have this network of writers that we've already been working with, because like a lot of the skills of like research and knowing how to structure something come into play when they're, again, reviewing the outline that the AI generates before they even start the article, things like that.
You said so much in that little pack. I'm gonna try to pack it. I'm gonna try to put it into boxes and aisles, because I think that you distilled what it means right now to go through the process of someone who wasn't used to being an editor is now an editor, right? So they're an editor for draft content that is being spawned out of Magic Land, right? So they typically didn't have that experience. And so are you finding that coaching them to look at each of their individual processes helps them slowly become an editor? Or is it true, or do you actually perceive that the outcomes of letting them be part of that interaction improves the net, right? So where I think this is a common conversation topic is putting this in the hands of the writer making them a better writer, or is it making them a better editor?
That's a good question.
Having done some of this work, I would say both. So right, the big news when GPT-4 came out was, we got a 5 on the AP test, and I was like, I got a 5 on the AP test, and when I was 17 years old, you didn't want me anywhere near your marketing. So, but like, I don't want a precocious 17-year-old doing all my marketing copy. And editing that out of GPT-4's responses can be a real pain in the ass. And that's what Megan, I think, was alluding to with like good editing. Like if I could do that for a subpar freelancer, I can also do that for the robot. At the same time, the writing piece, I think, is really important, with where Megan was talking in the process about getting involved at every step. When I get the intro paragraph to a blog back from the AI, am I a good enough writer to make substantive improvements to this paragraph? Because we're then going to feed that back into the prompt when it writes the rest of the article. My favorite story about this is I put an M dash in an intro once, and then we fed it back to the AI, and it put an M dash in every single paragraph. And it is listening in that environment. And so your writing skills are really relevant when you're revising. The editing, to Megan's point, is not necessarily all new, but it is editing out some of that stuff that the robot does, whether you ask it to or not.
And so, I think the stakes, I just want to say the stakes of the editing are a lot higher, right? Like if you're working with a freelance writer that you're used to working with, you're looking to make, small improvements to the style and the language. Maybe you're restructuring it, but you can usually assume, if this is someone you work with, that like the facts they say are correct, right? If you don't do as good of a job editing that one piece, it's not a huge risk to your brand's reputation. With the AI, if you fail to edit a piece, like you could be publishing something completely untrue, something biased, anything like that. And so the stakes are just really different.
Yeah, I think when people see examples of the stakes being high, often they'll say, well, it's not really that high, right? But their reputation relies on it. I have an example of, it's a description of the ingredients in a particular beer, right? Y'all are in Colorado, so you'll appreciate that. And I was like, but if you're the person who produces that, that's pretty high stakes if that's wrong. But you as a casual reader may think, oh, well, that's, so what if it's wrong, right? But then you have to think to yourself, the person who's looking for that information has no idea whether it's right or wrong. So the stakes are ultimately massively high. And if you're thinking about this from a Google perspective, this is going to be the difference maker. And I've been using the term, your content needs to be authentic and authenticatable. That's becoming really, really important. But tracking back to something you said, and I'm gonna save some time, talk about some tactics. You've kind of pushed them in and didn't even realize it. Talking about recursive prompting, talking about generally prompting, talking about tweaking things in the process of working with it as an editor. And we'll get into that. I know I already have questions coming on Twitter about, ask them about this, ask them about that. But I liked what you said about fact checking. So many people don't know fact checking is an art. Fact checking is a skill that needs to be developed. There's a 600-page journalism manual about it. I've unfortunately read most of it. Once I said I read the whole thing. I said, actually, I didn't. I skimmed part of it, but I read a good chunk of it. And so, basic fact checking versus advanced fact checking, even that alone is an absolute skill to develop. And so what other kind of journalistic or editor processes do you think if you skip them, you die? If you don't, you've got to evolve them, right? And so fact checking is one. In my opinion, developmental editing is another, right? If you're not going to go through a process to take an outline and have somebody who really understands the voice of your periodical or your site to see, hey, is this on track? And let's improve it. That means you got to create an outline in the first place, right? What other processes are you involving that come from the SEO world, that come from the editor world, the writing world? What other process are you making sure you don't skip?
Yeah, I would say, and jump in here, Ryan, to you, but the biggest ones for me are just with the quality of the content when you're reading it, like making sure that the structure makes sense. That's one of the biggest things. I mean, which is part of the developmental editing also, but like, the AI will produce an outline, but as a human, it's your job to go through that and make sure, does this actually make sense? Am I answering what the reader expects to find? Am I including all the information that they would expect to see? Are there gaps here? If you read the headings that it produces, are these actually like repetitive when you think about it? And then getting into just that logical flow of information. And again, like it's still a piece of content. The reader expects to kind of go through a journey of sorts, right? Whatever they're looking for, whatever the search intent was, and making sure that the content aligns with that. That's one of my kind of biggest things there. On the SEO front, if you were just working strictly with, say, ChatGPT, it's not a keyword analysis tool, right? You could ask it for keywords related to a given topic, but it's not like, that's not what it's doing. And so that piece needs to come elsewhere, right? From other tools that are likely using AI, but you can't just go directly to ChatGPT for that. So I think that's a really important thing for people to understand is like, yeah, you can ask it for a list of keywords, but that's not based on anything, actually relevant to the web.
We're talking about expertise,
okay.
and I think with the SEO spot, the other thing I would mention is search intent. Like, did you read the article at the end and make sure this actually answers the person's question? There's so much content on the internet that does not do that, and AI is just going to make it worse. So making sure that just basic fundamental goal of content is achieved is, I think, a big priority on the editing front as well. I guess we also kind of, Megan and I left out, we're coming up on 20,000 pieces of content created in the past year or so with AI, and we've refined the processes and like figured this stuff out. So very much some trial and error here on our part to figure out what's been working and what's not on all of this, which is, I think, why we're able to speak about some of this editing with such confidence. My first time out of the gate, I was all over the place. So if you're also feeling that way, no shame.
So I love that, right? So it's make sure the stuff that's being produced actually does what it says it's going to do. Yeah. How do you coach that? How do you influence that? And then I do have many follow-up questions to that, but how are you all doing that in a way that is being impactful on the outcomes? Are you coaching revision, or are you coaching sequential prompt response processes for your writer?
So I would say both, but Megan will have more details.
Should your writer be revising it themselves, or should their writer be going through that trial and error process, or how do you get ahead of it?
Yeah. So we have slightly different flows depending on our clients and depending on the exact type of content that we're creating, because we found certain things work better. If you're creating a really general 500-word piece of content for a general maybe lifestyle topic versus a longer form, say, legal blog or something like that, right? We've actually used different processes for these kind of prioritizing different things in that prompt chain. So we are doing, though, a sequential thing where as I mentioned, we're first generating an outline. And in some cases, we're actually using example outlines to help the AI understand, like, okay, here's the format we're looking for. Here's what the types of topics we should be talking about within this single title. But as I mentioned, then that goes to the writer, because you need that human input that early in the process. Otherwise, you're just setting yourself up for so much work later on, right? And so then the writer's editing that, and then we're building the article piece by piece, with the writer being able to edit, review, still make updates to the outline, all the way through that process. And then all of that edited content that they're producing, or that they're creating, and the edited outline are fed into the model each time to produce the next section. So it's iterative, it builds on those improvements. As Ryan mentioned, like, you make style changes in those early sections, it will continue those on later. And so obviously, you could write the article all at one go at the beginning and just have the writers just going to be spending a lot more time making those improvements all the way through, versus this way we're kind of setting up the AI to help steer it closer to what we're looking for earlier on.
So you casually use terms like prompt chain and that you're feeding things back in. A question I got off of the X Twitter is, do they build bespoke models or tuned models for their clients?
So we do not build bespoke models currently. We do occasionally. We've looked at fine tuning for, again, the thing with fine tuning is you need the volume there for it to make sense, and you really need the content to all follow a very specific format. Because when you fine tune a model, it's going to get really great on that format. But if things change, if they decide to change their style guide, or they want to follow a different template or prompt or format, you're going to have to redo all of that work. So we found better luck in most cases with just changing the prompts. And with regard to bespoke models, we've looked at a lot of different models. And for example, like the increased context window on Anthropic's Claude 2 is really exciting. In terms of just you being able to feed it that much more background information for your content. Like, that's super exciting. But what I found is the quality of the content in other ways, OpenAI's models still are the best for most things that we found. And some of these other bespoke models or open source models, like, they might be better in certain dimensions. We found OpenAI's to be the best kind of all-purpose ones. And then it really comes down to just how you're doing the prompting and getting the right sequence there, feeding in the right background information. But yeah, fine tuning is a really good option in certain cases. But I would recommend you really need to know that, like, okay, we're going to want this consistently all the time for this client. And again, the volume needs to be there.
Okay, awesome. There's a follow-up question from that same person that states, Ryan mentioned lots of trial and error. How would he describe how his and his team's prompts have evolved?
That's a great question. Prompting wise, I think we've gotten a lot better at, and Megan, by all means, correct me here, but I think we've gotten a lot better at specifying prompts for a specific use case or client. It is not one prompt fits all. At the same time, the editors and writers aren't the ones doing the prompting necessarily. We are with the chain and stuff, but like, those aren't the folks who are working with the client up front or who are building that first initial set of things to feed the AI as examples. So ironically, the answer there is kind of like even more human involvement up front. The more information you give the AI at the beginning, the better it will perform, and the more you can automate at the end. Is the short answer. What did I leave out there, Megan?
Yeah, I just wanted to say it's an interesting thing. Ryan mentioned over 20,000 pieces, right? So we are really doing this at scale. If you are using an AI tool like ChatGPT yourself to write a single article, like, you can be giving it super unique prompts and going back and forth with it in a way that is totally different than what we're doing. We're like, when I'm kind of building prompts for a new client or a new project or new content type, I'm trying to figure out, okay, what's going to get us kind of the best baseline across all of these different topics, right? I'm not able to go in and give it a single, a unique flow for every single one. That's why we're kind of finding that balance of like, okay, getting the best baseline to start with, and then immediately turning it over to the writer to make improvements from the very beginning. So it's kind of trying to still get that ability of the large language model to like follow unique prompts and follow examples, while doing it in a scalable way.
So how do y'all think of, by the way, thank you, Billy, for the text. I got another one via the Twitter, and then we'll get to some of these awesome questions that I'm getting from people who are using the proper medium for sending questions in and not just DMing me. But from Kelvin, who is also a really wonderful SEO. He'd like it if I said that. He texted me and said, what is your perspective on Verblio's processes? Do you consider them Verblio's IP or like some agencies are? Or are you publishing those? And it's a little tougher question. Are you publishing those like, say, which Chris Penn might do at Trust Insights?
So we've not been publishing our sequences yet. I don't consider them IP per se. I think part of that is just, again, as I mentioned, we have different ones for different clients. So part of that is, if we're using their information in that, keeping that confidential in that. I love playing around with prompts.
Answer. I like that.
I don't.
That's right. I think you're right. I think it is IP. I think it's your intellectual property, and then you can decide what you publish. And that's my perspective. I know it's not terribly popular, and you can give advice on this. But no, I think because it can be focused on a client, I think it's an agency's responsibility to hold that and make it maybe even the client's preference. But Ryan, what were you going to say? Sorry, I cut you off.
No, I was thinking that like at a certain point, this is just doing a good job. Like, but is it IP or is it intellectual property when it's a skill set and like it's a service? And from that perspective, I don't know. I'm a content marketer. I give away the farm at every opportunity. So like the whole point is to add value as early as possible. So I have no problem talking about all that stuff, but within the limit of what Megan brought up, which is that we do, of course, safeguard and protect client information.
Neato. No, that's cool. All right, so I'm going to get into some more questions before we get into the thing that you said you wanted to get on the soapbox for. But I do, one question, last one before we hop into a few is numbers, proper nouns, declarative statements. What else should I know from fact checking, Jeff? Well, there is a book about it. I will include it in the show notes if you want to learn how an editor learns it or a journalist learns it. But I mean, from you, Megan and Ryan, what other elements are you training your team to catch? And I have a handful I'll give at the end, but what are you training your team to catch as far as from a fact checking or negative tendency for output?
Dates is one that I don't know was in that list. And anytime it tries to cite a source, I'm immediately on guard. Because it's not citing a source, right? It knows that in a sentence about this topic, the words that most commonly follow a declarative statement are the Mayo Clinic or right, like whatever. And so like, and the closer we get to YMYL content, the more scared I am, the harder I check. If we are writing about shingle blow off, I mostly trust it. If we're talking about like medical condition, like I'm almost nervous that the AI is there at all, but I check everything. So there's also, I think, that sliding scale that's an important thing to kind of have dialed in.
What's shingle blow off? First of all, because I know what shingle blow off is in SEO. That's actually an SEO phrase, and I don't think that's what you were talking about.
No, I was literally referring to like if we were building a blog on behalf of a local roofer, and that local roofer wanted to capture some SEO traffic by having great content about shingles falling off of roofs.
If anyone knows what shingle blow off is and they write it in the Q&A in terms of SEO, I will personally build you a content plan. So put that in there. That is an obscure reference. I thought you were going like deep SEO like stuff. Okay. Anyway, but yes, shingle. I love the idea of shingle blow off and then the difference in writing about shingles, right?
Yeah.
Taking a different approach. I think that's critical. So dates, proper nouns. What other things, Megan? And then I'll round that out.
Yeah, the one big category I'd add to that is anything very recent, because of just when the model's data set's cut off. So if it's talking about some super new technology, or if it's talking about anything that's happened recently, or how something has been updated recently, anything like that, you really need to watch out for, because the information it was trained on won't be that up to date and accurate.
Good ideas, yes. And knowing that, some things I look for is, you can coach out bad habits out of the output, right? So, but you got to know what a bad habit is. So if you're writing content that actually doesn't get anywhere, right? Declarative statements that aren't appropriate. So a great example of this I tend to see, and this is something, especially if you're writing middle of funnel, is where the logic that got the output to declare something the best or a superlative wouldn't hold up in court. It's basically saying like, and then I had seen this thing over here, and then this thing over here. Thus, that makes it the best thing in the world. No, that those A and B don't equal C, and that's really, really hard to catch if one isn't an expert. So be wary of any superlatives and declarative statements where it's to say, this is that. Make sure this is that, because you can get into real trouble. I've seen entire sites get completely filtered in Google because of poor use of declarative statements. So keep an eye on those. Okay, some great questions from the audience. They are piling up. Okay, so Jamie from THD, from the old Orange, the big Orange home goods store. What are the magic words to convince higher-ups who come from a business background that AI can't replace human creatives? I've got great answers to this, but what are your takes on this?
I'm sorry, you're at a place where you have to do that convincing. That's my first thought.
I'm now in Atlanta, by the way. I just moved to Atlanta, so I will come over there and tell them this, just so you know, if you ask, Jamie. So, I just moved there moved back 3 weeks ago. But okay, Megan, Ryan, how would you tackle this?
I think this is born out of a desire to do marketing as cost effectively as possible, and putting it in those terms is, I think, helpful for any conversation from a marketer to higher ups. So, this might be like tactically as simple as finding cheaper ways to employ human freelancers and demonstrate we are cutting costs, but we still want to do this the best possible way. Can also talk about the risks of AI, the fact checking, like not drinking AI from the tap is, or rather the reverse of that. If you publish pure AI content on your website, you are taking a risk. I think the Google risks are maybe not what we thought they were 6 months ago, but there are other risks associated with that. We talked about high stakes, fact checking, stuff like that. And so those risks are ultimately more expensive than the cost of doing this properly. Just as buying a Super Bowl spot and putting up a crappy ad is a bigger risk, it costs more than the spot does. So that I think that's the kind of conversation. That's the place I'd seek to drive the conversation, I guess.
No, it's awesome. Megan, what do you think?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've talked with some clients who asked to talk with us, basically saying like, hey, we're getting under a lot of pressure to be using AI in our content process somehow. Like, what's the best way we should be using it? And like, my answer is like, there's often is some way that AI could help you be more efficient in your content process. Like, that is absolutely true. And so I think oftentimes it's helping them like show their higher ups that, hey, we are using this in these appropriate ways, and here's why we still need humans in these certain areas, right? But for the most part, it's like, I think oftentimes the higher ups will be satisfied if you're saying like, hey, we are looking into this and we're using this in certain ways, but we need humans, still helping with figuring out, maybe prioritizing pieces in the content strategy. We still need humans on the fact checking, to Ryan's point, on just the risks of if you don't do that. And I think rather than taking this wholesale, no, we don't want to touch AI, right? Yeah. That's not the right approach either. You do need to be learning how to use it, but the proper ways.
No, I love that. And I love you're talking about the risk, and you can see a risk, but the stakes have to be communicated clearly. And I think that, taking storytelling approach can very much help with anything for somebody who is more business oriented. So I would be thinking of kind of what's the story of somebody who gets misinformed by my business. I'm thinking of 2 children in a backyard crying when dad falls out of an improperly built treehouse because we informed them how to build it wrong. I'm thinking of a guy stung by bees because we had an article that told them how to get bees out of their garage, and we didn't give them the right information. I'm talking about, that 2x4 that should have been a 4x8. And that's going to tell the story to the people you're talking to. Is that You need me because I know that. And so the other question I got is there room for writers to not be experts anymore?
That's a great question.
I have really good guests.
I have some opinions here, but no one's saying anything. I'm going to go for it. Coming from a creative background, I've always been impressed and a little surprised by the prevalence of journalism in content marketing. This idea that asking the right questions and doing the right interview can somehow turn you into a master storyteller. And the more journalists I've met in content marketing, the more impressed I've been with that approach. The person who's not the expert asking the right questions and telling a great story. And I think the best journalists will continue to succeed in content marketing in that sense. I think that we have already gone too far down a road of not enough expertise in most content. That is particularly bottom of funnel content or thought leadership and so my thought is that long term for like future of search ramification, I'm talking like 30,000 foot view here. The content that answers a simple question, particularly with like SGE and the other like search-based AI stuff, that content's going to have to get very tight and very straightforward. The other end of our content spectrum, the thought leadership, is going to have a point of view, have to have an opinion. It's going to have to say something that is a little risky, and AI can't write that, shouldn't write that. And so the expertise there, the ability to tell that story based on interviewing a thought leader, I think will very much stay. So does the writer need to be the expert? I don't think so in that case if they're a great interviewer. I'll pause there.
So your summary is awesome, but so to highlight, and Megan, I'd love your take on that, is if you are in charge of writing, you need to have a skill. It may not be being a subject matter expert, but your skill needs to be developed, and that skill needs to be clear that you're contributing, and whether that is storytelling, whether that is journalistic skill, like something has to be a skill. And Megan, you can add this to the list of questions. The perception may be that somebody unskilled can execute, and that's what we're kind of debunking today. So, but Megan, how would you add that?
Yeah, no, I just want to second that. I think writers have always had those journalistic skills. Good writers have always had those skills that Ryan's talking about, the ability to research and fact check. I mean, I think that's a mark of a good writer, is being able to talk about something where they're not necessarily a previous subject matter expertise, but they're able to do the research and know their sources. Now, that's a whole other angle where the ability to find good sources is becoming even more important, right? And the ability to know when I'm reading something online, okay, can I trust this? Was this published by somebody who didn't actually review their AI content and just published it wholesale, right? Like there's so much more content out there now, that ability to know what sources to trust becomes that much more important. But I think, again, that's a skill writers have always had. I don't think that precludes them from being able to write about those topics now. I think where we get into trouble is somebody thinking like, oh, well, now AI can write all these words for me on this topic I don't know about, and I can, publish thought leadership in an area I know nothing about. And that's just completely false.
Awesome follow-up that related to that from Elizabeth from Lewis PR. What would you say to someone who thinks that AI is only for organizations focused on cost and time savings and quantity versus quality?
Okay, can I get on the soapbox now? Is it okay?
Other than soapbox, that one, but I think it's relevant here because it says, what is the business case that you're making, and what do you say to somebody who has that as their perceived business case?
I think we've been talking a lot about like AI as a word generator, and Ryan Law said this really well, that we've decoupled word count from effort. They're just not related anymore. I can have as many words as I want for zero effort. And we've talked a lot about that use case. Should the AI be writing your content? I see all over the place people using AI really, really wisely to make themselves more efficient as marketers. And I think that's where the AI will not replace you. You will be replaced by somebody who uses AI better than you phrase actually holds up. On the writing side, I don't like that. But on the we need to learn to use new tools as marketers to do our jobs best, that's really valid. And I think that we should all be working on that. But I also think that doesn't go far enough. And this is, I suppose, the soapbox is like, doing the same tasks you were doing yesterday, faster, better, even cheaper with AI is fine, but that will soon become table stakes. It arguably is inching there already. Like we're getting close to that being table stakes already. What could I do tomorrow with AI that I was not capable of doing yesterday without it? That use case is what's going to level you up to the point that the sky is not falling, your job is not at risk, because you're going to be able to accomplish something new as a marketer. And if you're not spending some of your time thinking about what those tasks and projects and campaigns might be, you're doing yourself a disservice, and you're not leveraging AI to the best of its capability. AI as a tool for writing blog posts is, I think, shockingly mediocre, and is why we're talking about adding humans at all the right moments. Using AI to build something that you couldn't physically build last year is so cool and so exciting. And that's an opportunity that I think as marketers we should all be latching onto. Those things are going to look different for different folks based on budget, skill set, industry. So that's not a one size fits all answer. But I really do think that people should be focusing on that, thinking about that, trial and error it, figure it out. Say, I'm going to invest a couple hours on this thing with AI, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And that's a great way to also, circling back, lead that conversation. Hey, we're trying something brand new that we would have never been able to accomplish, and we're doing it for free because of AI, right? Like what a great story to tell the higher ups.
We're going to save some of those examples till the end.
Yes.
But I've got lots of them, and I want to hear from yours. So, but no, that's awesome. I think Elizabeth's follow-up to that, I think, is appropriate in a minute, but I think it goes down a different avenue. But to that question from Jamie, who we heard from before, asked a couple of great questions. Is it worth it as a writer creative then to study prompt engineering? Is that more important than perhaps what you just highlighted, Ryan? Business case development.
I mean, I'm all fired up now. So no, not at all. I don't think you should study prompt engineering if you're a marketer, because what's happening already is the reason ChatGPT blew up is that it had the chat interface. That's the whole point. Like that was its great contribution in my mind, because we're going to be a GPT-10 and GPT-3 and 4 are going to look like kiddie stuff. Making it available to everyone via the chat interface was huge, and eventually prompt engineering is going to become table stakes as a product feature for all these AI companies. That they're going to make the prompt part as accessible as possible because they want their product to be used by the largest swath of people. This is already happening. There are already plugins for ChatGPT that you can use to suggest follow-ups and such for your prompts when you're working with it one-on-one. So like, if we're already with the plugins, the GPT-10s of the world are going to have all of that stuff built in. I would focus far more on not prompt engineering, but being willing to ask the next question, the follow-up question, trying new use cases, things like that. And now Megan can tell me I'm wrong, and the prompting is very important.
No, I want to completely second that, because to your point, like I think of prompt engineering as kind of like the evolution beyond normal software programming, right? Like we don't, now us normal people, we don't have to learn how to code everything in Python or in Rust or something else. We can actually just speak to the AI in natural language. And it's gotten better at that already from the earlier GPTs. And that's only going to continue to improve as companies focus more on alignment, which you hear a lot around like AI safety stuff, but alignment also, it just more broadly means like correctly interpreting the user's intent in their prompt. And so as they improve on that, like to Ryan's point, the kind of doing the acrobatics with the prompt engineering yourself, like you won't have to do that as much. Right now, is it still important? And if you are, really getting in there and playing with these models, you're going to get better at that on your own. But I think to Ryan's point, like do that in the context of figuring out new use cases and trying different things with it versus feeling like you need to go super nitty gritty on like the prompt engineering itself. Think about it more broadly, and you will pick up the necessary skills as you go. And again, in the meantime, the models will be improving to better interpret your language too.
I'm going to take slightly the don't there and go treat it like a boat. You don't want to buy and own a boat. So you don't want to continuously have to improve your skill set on this thing you may not love, but you want to have access to somebody who has a boat, because boats are fun, right? So find somebody in your network who gets prompt engineering and keep an ear to them because they really care about that. In my case, my background is in computer science. I love product management. I love learning about prompt engineering. I love learning about fine tuning and all this fun stuff. So you want to find the Jeff in your crew who you can keep an ear to the ground, or if you don't want to learn it yourself. So I would say treat it like a boat, because I have seen the no here. And this goes to Elizabeth's follow-up question on this was, I've seen the no where people aren't getting better. And I've seen them think that large language models do A, but they don't do A. You mentioned one thing before, is keyword research, right? I've seen people think that if they ask it, what are the coolest? I literally have seen a YouTube video from one of the most popular affiliate persons pointing at his YouTube video where he asks GPT to sort a list of keywords by semantic similarity or relevance, or give him a content plan and sort it by, relevance degree. It'll sort it by relevance degree. Guess what? Those numbers are not real, right? And I've seen that video get 10 million views while I'm sitting in the corner scratching my neck, right? And so those are the types of things, learn them. And Elizabeth, to your question, if you don't, you're going to be disappointed. And I was wondering your guys' take on this. This question is, have you encountered disappointment from writers whose roles have shifted to being AI-enabled editors? I think that's like the coolest question of the day. And I've seen writers leave and stop writing, and they are like downtrodden. And it's really because they didn't have the boat to borrow that would get them to the next level. And I think that's you guys are bringing people to the best next level. Sorry, have you had that experience with writers? They just become uninspired and I don't want to do this. This isn't what I signed up for.
Yes. And also I want to say I love the boat analogy, and I am the person who loves digging into the prompt engineering, but I also recognize I don't need all of our writers to do this. That's specifically why I want to do it for them and lend them the boat. But
and I'm the person with the cooler of the beer coming up and getting on the boat. So
yes,
which is maybe the most important role of all. But no, so we've seen. Obviously, we work with hundreds of writers, so we have seen kind of the full gamut of responses here. And especially early on, we saw that fear, we saw that kind of disillusionment. I think the thing that I'm proudest of us for doing, and that I'm happiest with that we're doing at Verblio, is moving from providing them with a fully written draft where they know it's generated by AI, but they're not working with the tools themselves. They just know, okay, I need to fact check this, I need to edit, I need to make it better, to actually giving them the tools to go back and forth with the AI. Just empowering feels like a really overused cliche word here, but actually allowing them to go back and forth with the AI themselves so they can see, okay, I made these changes to the introduction and here's how it impacted its writing of the rest of the article. Kind of that first step to learning how to work with these tools. Because I think any freelance writer is starting to understand, for pure economy's sake, and efficiencies, they're probably going to need to figure out how to use these tools to stay competitive. And so I'm glad that we're helping them do that. But again, we can do as much education as we want. There will still be some who are completely resistant to the idea. That's just kind of the nature of any new technology, right?
They better find 10 people who aren't, and find a way to stream their expertise into their brains. Because those are experts who don't want to get their expertise on paper. I'll never get it. And that's the people that they can be enabled by the journalists. They can be enabled by the creative. If for one reason or another, that subject matter expert doesn't want that stuff out of their brain, or only wants it out of their brain at the pace at which they can draw with their quill on the parchment, which frankly, that's what we are in that world. There are a lot of folks who are like, unless I'm writing it, I don't want it out there. They're missing the boat. They're missing the train. I'll switch from boat analogy. They're missing the train because they can get so much more out there. I mean, I'm not a great writer, but I've 10x'd my writing capabilities. I can produce 10 times the product at higher levels of quality than I could a year and a half ago. And it's not because of improved language models. It's just because these are skills to develop, right? And so these are things to be considering. If you have an expert who is, I think it's your job to drag the goo out of their brain, and turn them into a much more successful expert. Renee from Digital Inc. 600-page journalism manual you mentioned. Ooh, I will get back to you. It's a blankety blanks fact-checking journalist book. I will know that answer in the next few minutes, or somebody who's monitoring this show will text me it. But it's a fact-checking. I forget who wrote it. I want to drag into, so Elizabeth asked a follow-up. She's asking amazing questions. You mentioned something, and I talk about it, and you may have seen my presentation on this, and that's where you stole it, Ryan. Just kidding. But it's about finding your why, right? Finding the why to adopt AI. Finding your why to adopt AI was the little, right? And I was inspired by Washington Post, and they implemented a thing called heliograph. And one of the reasons why they implemented heliograph was, before heliograph, they couldn't cover all the Olympic events during the Olympics. So they had to pick and choose who got the coverage. And that's not fair, right? They want everybody to at least get a minimum amount of coverage. And then they can use editorial knowledge to write more feature lengths and things like that. So heliograph allowed them to cover all the events. That's cool, right? Elections, which is, politically motivated. Which ones will they cover and which ones don't they? At least have a minimum. Those are the why for Washington Post. So I always tell people, find your Olympics, find your elections. What is that for you? What's the thing you couldn't do before, is the way that Ryan, you said it. And so to this specific question, what are the benefits your clients have seen with AI generated human edited content? Is it getting content faster, better performing, greater quantity, lower cost? What are the benefits of working with somebody who's hustling like you all are? And is it that they're able to find the why, or are you finding the why for them? Are they coming you with it?
A little bit of both. And okay. As a marketer, I hate leading with this, but it's cheaper and it's faster. The answer to that question is we're producing the articles in half the time at less than half the cost. It is wild how much more efficient AI has made some of the stuff we've been doing. And one of the great use cases there, one of the whys, is location pages, finding a way to make programmatic SEO not crappy and not thin. And Megan pioneered that whole process for Verblio and built it all out from scratch. So I will shut up and let her take it from here.
No, I think
macro
that one is
SEO.
Yeah,
you're using it for purposes of macro SEO implementation. You're talking about. Okay, so Megan, tell us the story here.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that's a perfect example of something that they simply couldn't do previously for any sort of cost that would have made sense, right? Publishing thousands of location pages for every location of a certain hardware store. It simply wouldn't have made sense to pay humans to create that content, and you don't want to just use a kind of Mad Lib style template for it either. And so that's probably one of my favorite projects so far, because we're figuring out, okay, how do we do it for these pages? But also we are talking about things like lawn care tools, where things like the weather and the climate of the region of that particular store matter. And also we want to reference the physical location of the store. You can't, if you rely on AI to tell you where it's located in a certain small town in Tennessee, it's not going to get it right. And so what we did there was actually a really cool blend of using the AI to generate kind of most of the content for those pages, and even more than just telling humans, hey, you need to go in and fact check if it mentions a specific location. We actually used placeholder tags to keep the AI from even making that up in the first place, and then told humans and gave them a Google Maps link of, hey, go in, and fill in the actual location here. But there's certain kind of almost user interface things to help the humans who are working with the AI understand, again, it's easy to say you need to go fact check all these things, but figuring out how we can help them make it easier and make it okay, you don't worry about fact checking the location, actually just replace this tag or things like that. And then we also did something where we separated out by region, so that the AI was talking about a specific region all at once, so that we knew we were going to get the weather and the climate right, and kind of thinking about what are those things it's most likely to get wrong, changing the prompts for that on the back end, or figuring out how you organize it in a little bit better way. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here. The point was the
No, it's
why.
cool. It's cool. You got it. So you're looking at scale, and it allows you to drive to creativity not possible, personalization. I think the trick on local is how can you tell the story that you actually are naturally you have a natural affinity with the location. So it's not about necessarily saying, and this is old macro SEO. I'm not going to call out names of the people who used to do this, but old macro SEO would be, if you're in Atlanta, you are 1.8 miles from the aquarium and you are 1 mile from the MLK monument, and you are, and that's the old. It uses a data source to generate Mad Libs, but it's cool. It's nifty, right? Now you're able to do another layer, but it's about it's about the creativity of knowing that if you are a bicycling injury attorney covering bike lanes in that local town, tells the story you actually live there. Covering traffic statistics. Yeah, that's your story. Those are use cases. It allows you to do that easier and at scale, right? Mm-hmm.
To bring it full circle, using AI, again, straight from the tap, full out, the raw output for this use case also doesn't work. Like, I think this has become LinkedIn has discovered this use case recently, I will say. And like, playing Mad Libs with the AI will get the facts wrong. So this is the perfect example of a thing that was not possible to do at scale using only humans. We must use AI to make this use case accessible as a business. We also still have to use humans in all the right ways for it to be successful, because otherwise Google will de-index your site.
Yep. Yes. Well, yeah. We didn't talk about if you do these things wrong. This is going to be the harshest slap Google ever lays on you. Is going to be if they realize that you're trying to pass off something as authentic that isn't authentic. And I think that's going to get back into it. Are you using a proprietary tool that keeps your info secure when you're putting prompts back into ChatGPT? I'm going to stack some of these questions off fast. Is there anywhere we can see some example of Verblio prompts? And
on the ChatGPT and information security, we use it through the API, not through ChatGPT specifically. So because we're doing it at such scale, so we're going through the API, and so it's the information is secure because of that.
Anything you want to share on the prompt? I would recommend, I am a firm believer in the RACE method for prompt structure. So role, action, context, and execution. And hat tip to Chris Penn, who I've mentioned once before, for warming me up to this quite a while ago. And that's where I'm defining the role of the language model. I'm defining their task. I'm defining any context or delivering data. And then I'm delivering what they should execute. And so always be thinking about that. It's a good way to think about it. There's a lot of other people who have built prompt structure thoughts and processes. I've gotten 2 citations on fact checking. There's a great, by the way, thank you so much for the tip. Pointer Institute has a great course on it. The Chicago Guide is a good book. It isn't the one I'm necessarily talking about, but the Chicago Guide is a recommended reading. So apparently there's a ton of fact-checking books in that text, because it is a class you can take at college, So go check out Pointer Institute, check out the Chicago Guide, and I'll try to find that other one that I'm referencing. Amazing. We have covered so much. I didn't even get to a lot of these things, but I'm going to say one thing for me, and then I'd love to say, what's the coolest thing you've done or seen done with these technologies went on there? I think we're going to get to a point where every content type, the intent connects to an intent deserves experience, and intent deserves expertise, and everything else is a commodity. How do you see that? And then also, tell us a story of the coolest thing you've built or you're working on right now, and then we'll close it up.
I love that. I love what you just said, Jeff, everything else being a commodity. Like, I think as somebody who has been a writer for a long time, we've for a long time used writing and content as these umbrella words, when actually what's being produced is so different and is serving such different functions in such different roles. And I think AI has really highlighted that of like, yes, some of this content is a commodity, right? Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily a creative thing. It's not, it is serving a purpose for this client on the web, and that is its function. And I think often as writers, we need to get away from the fact that like this is a piece of our soul that we're putting out there, right? There is content that is that, and it's unfortunate we use the same word for both of them, but like kind of being clear on that purpose and understanding where it's appropriate to use AI. The coolest thing I would say, and this is just from a very people standpoint, is just, I mentioned some writers have been resistant to using AI tools, and that's understandable. But personally, the coolest thing for me has been seeing how many writers get excited about this. And like, we are a company full of liberal arts nerds, and like to see like how much we've all embraced AI and like how much the company as a whole has taken from, we've had competitors, especially early on, who took a stance of, we're not touching AI and we're not doing anything with that. And obviously, as in the last 6 months, that often those voices have turned. But I think what I've been excited about to see is like our company and kind of really embracing it and being more optimistic and seeing like, how can we leverage this? How can this make our jobs better? How can this give us more time to spend on the truly creative parts? And leveraging it and helping all of our writers do the same, who are absolutely being impacted by this. So not to get too touchy-feely, but like that's been really cool for me, is like the optimism towards the future and cool. Tech is a cool thing to be part of.
I totally agree.
From you, Ryan.
I think Megan talked about like putting your soul out there as a creative and things like that, and people consume content to improve, right? Content needs to make the consumer of that content better in some way, by inspiring a thought, by literally giving them the information they were looking for, by helping them learn a skill or improve in a very tangible way. And all content is going to have to do that and do it well, AI generated or not. Like that, I think we will index more and more towards content that accomplishes something or helps the reader, viewer, listener accomplish something. And that's kind of where I stand there. I think one of the coolest things I've been working on with AI is this idea that AI can fuel a bet strategy for content. So one of the things that was always pretty risky but very cool to do in the past was look for things that you think have low keyword volume or low search volume now, and therefore low keyword difficulty, but in the future might have relevance to your business and have a spike in search traffic, have a spike in volume. Target all of those with AI enabled content now, and then only some of them have to actually see that spike in volume for it to pay off for your business, because you can build the content faster. The example here is like a big eclipse, right? Like topic, nobody's searching about that now, but when it's in the news, when we're coming up to a big eclipse, that will have traffic. That's probably not relevant for your business, but like I've been
doing that for years, Ryan. It's a great recommendation. I love it. I give you an example. I work with a sports publisher. We try to pick the athletes that are going to be dominant now, so that when the Final Four comes along, they have the full clusters in place and they crush it and own it when something happens to one of the players. So on the nose, that is one of my favorite use cases, is getting more done. It's being able to write articles about industry specific, if you're in B2B, that you wouldn't have before. It's about being able to precede that inventory. So awesome points. And gosh, I'm so impressed with the way you guys describe this. It's really been a thoughtful conversation, and we got to most of the questions, but thanks so much. Personalized content audit, marketmuse.com/book demo. We're going to be at Content Marketing World. Are y'all going to Content Marketing World?
No, not this year,
sure. Right? Okay. Content Marketing World for me. I've got a code here for $100. How can people get in touch with you, and what should they know about getting in touch with Verblio, getting started?
LinkedIn's the best way to get in touch with me, and get in touch with Verblio is as simple as going to the website. We also got AI resources page and a whole bunch of this stuff that we've been talking about in more depth on there. So definitely check that out too.
Wonderful. LinkedIn. I'm also Megan at Verblio. Yeah, I was just going to say Megan at Verblio. AI. Yeah. I love talking about this stuff. If you guys have any questions, I know we didn't get to all of them. I saw some in there about like the ethics and the philosophy and the future of AI taking over humans. So if you want to send me questions like that, I will talk your ear off with my.
We could have gone 2.5 hours. We could have gone 2.5 hours here, but I think we may have to make a part 2 where we dive into actual prompts with visuals, and coaching someone through the entire process of how they would become at least good enough to get by right now, where I like a lot of people are really asking that question: how do I get myself from where I am today to at least as good as the middle of the pack here? But you guys are leading the pack. It's very impressive. I've probably only spoken to one agency who I feel has the level of integrity and expertise that you all do just from having this conversation. So congrats on making that move. I think that's really awesome. And I appreciate the time today and all the insight and transparency because a lot of agencies wouldn't be as transparent as you are. And that's huge. And thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, Jeff.
Cheers.